Welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Hi, everyone. This is Lori LeBay with Alzheimer Speaks, and I'm also the co-founder of Dementia Map. And we're going to have a wonderful show for you today. We have Reverend Jade Angelica joining us today, and we're going to be talking about all is not lost when dementia and caregiving hits. And she is so inspirational and is just a fabulous soul. She has written the 10th anniversary edition of her book, Where Two Worlds Touch: The Spirit and Science of Alzheimer's Caregiving. But before I introduce you to Jade, I just want to encourage you all to check out Alzheimer Speaks and look at our free educational resources. We have all kinds of things there, from video and audio to tools you can download, to graphics where you can be part of our Be a Giver of Hope program and cause. You can read poetry, and so much more. So just go to alzheimerspeaks.com. And then Dementia Map is our global resource directory. And there you can search like 150 categories. If you happen to have a service, product, or tool, if you are an individual or a company, organization, whatever, you can also input your information so people can find you easier in there. Or maybe you have a suggestion of somebody I should reach out to. Let me know that as well. And that website is dementiamap.com. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce you to Jade. Well, Jade, I am so excited to have you back on the show. I appreciate you as a whole, and I love spending time with you. And I'm really excited about your book and being able to share that with people. But I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, introduce yourself to our audience. And then we'll get into our line of questions after that.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Jade Angelica, and I am the founder of a nonprofit organization called Healing Moments for Alzheimer's, and we have been offering workshops and trainings and community services, church services all around the country for Alzheimer's awareness, Alzheimer's education, dementia care training since 2007. And so I am really happy to be here with Lori today to talk about my book, Where Two Worlds Touch, the Spirit and Science of Alzheimer's Caregiving, which is a new edition from the original that was written in 2014.
Wow, 2007, you've seen a lot of changes in this industry, just as I have. What are like two of the biggest things that you've seen change from when you first entered to right now?
Well, one of the biggest things I think I have seen change is some of the training that we actually do, which is to teach people to meet people with Alzheimer's where they are, because people with Alzheimer's have what we would consider faulty memory, but what they're remembering from years ago in this current time and place is really valid for them. So that's one of the big changes, is to invite people to join their loved ones with Alzheimer's where they are. And that phrase, it's been around for a long time, but it's finally just catching on. Therapeutic fiblets.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need to agree with what they're saying when we don't think it's true. But it's true for them. So that's the therapeutic fiblet part. The other major change I think I've seen over the years, Lori, is attention being paid to lifestyle changes as a way to protect ourselves, to prevent degenerative brain diseases like Alzheimer's and the other forms of dementia. So it's not exactly new. And I write a lot about this in the book. It's not exactly new because the first time I heard about lifestyle being important for brain health was at an Alzheimer's conference in Boston in 2009. So it takes a while for these new research innovations to come to the public awareness. And that's one of them. I mean, because there is no cure and we have very few medical interventions for treatment, we need to step up and do something ourselves, take care of ourselves, just like their healthy heart behaviors,
Mhm.
there's healthy brain lifestyle as well. So that's starting to get into the public awareness.
Yeah, well, and different things creep in as we go too. I remember, we had the basics, kind of what's good for the heart is good for the brain. But I remember when sleep came up, it's important to get 8 hours of sleep, and people are like, "Whoa, I never heard that one before," and how much that can affect you. And I know I notice it with me when I don't get sleep. My brain's not connecting on all cylinders, and so it's interesting. And I think as we go over the years, we'll probably learn more, about not just food and exercise and things, but ways to relax and get rid of that stress and the effects that that has on us, and all in the isolation, all of those things. Do you mind sharing, you cared for your mom, a little bit about that story with us, just kind of as a setup to our conversation and how you got into this realm?
Oh, sure. I was living in Portland, Maine, and my mom was living in Dubuque, Iowa, when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I I really tried to avoid getting involved because it's a scary thing, let's face it, And um, a cousin of mine brought her out to Maine to visit me. And Lori, I can't tell you how heart opening that experience was because my mom was a very competent, independent woman. And here she is now in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And it was so interesting to see how exquisitely vulnerable she was. And it just really touched my heart, that experience with her. And so over the next year, we communicated a lot through letters and we talked on the phone. And I found her to be really different in an endearing kind of way because my mom was really very judgmental of me and she was kind of a narcissist and she would always interrupt me if I tried to say something. And that had changed. She had forgotten all the things I did to that she was disappointed about, but she was just really engaged with me. And there was this sweetness about her that I hadn't experienced before. And my older sister was living with her at the time and asked me to come and stay with mom for 2 weeks while my sister went on vacation. And so I said yes. And it was interesting because I was terrified because my sister said that, well, you have to be prepared because, she's very uncooperative. She won't take her medicine. She won't eat. She's angry all the time. I can't get her to obey. You have to threaten to take her to the mental hospital. And I was like, oh my God, what have I said yes to? And so I read a book in the plane on the way out there, part of a book called Learning to Speak Alzheimer's. It was one of the early books that came out in 2004. And I got the idea from that book. It was talking about meeting people in the moment. And I got the idea from that book to use my improvisational theater training when I was with my mom, to say yes to what she was offering me. I was like, oh, okay, I can do that. And so the 2 weeks I spent with her were absolutely wonderful. I used my improv training. It was an invitation to just be compassionate, an invitation to listen, an invitation to slow down, to pay attention. And when I was leaving, now this is a woman who is in the, moderate stages of Alzheimer's. She knew I was leaving the next day. And she said to me, "Will you stay and take care of me? You're very kind to me."
Mm.
And I'll tell you, that just, I mean, it just touched my heart in that moment. And I said, "Well, I will do my best and to come back and take care of you." And that's what I did. It took a few years. My sister moved away. My mom was in a nursing home by herself. And I went through a discernment process and I left my life in Boston and I came out to Dubuque, Iowa, my hometown that I said I'd never come back to, but here I am. And, you know, Lori, I thought I was making a huge sacrifice. And I was happy to do that. I was happy to make that sacrifice. But it turned out to be one of the best experiences of my life. Um, an opportunity to really give and receive unconditional love and to reduce the suffering of someone who was very vulnerable. I can't tell you how meaningful that was to me. And the result was workshop development. The result were these books. And so that yes that I said to her that day, it helped me, it helped her, and it ended up helping a lot of other caregivers along the way too.
Wow, your story is similar to a friend of mine, Suska, who wrote Dementia Land, the book, and she's since passed. But she too did not get along with her mom. She was an artist, and her mom was very judgmental. And she wrote this book that's very playful, and did this podcast because she's an artist and has these characters, and it was just incredible. But it just changed everything, that we've been taught, that this is hard, this is difficult, and not that it's not, but
Right.
there are such simple tools to make this better. Like, I get really irritated, and one of these days I'm just going to do a little video on this, and I haven't done it yet. But every time I see a commercial for medications, oh, mom gets angry and mom does this, and I'm like, yeah, look at the way she's approaching her. Look at the way she's
Yeah.
talking to her. Those
Yeah.
are the little simple things that we learn through this process that calm it down, and it gets rid of that edge. And not that, I mean, we all get edgy at times, and a person with dementia is still going to, just like we do. It's not going to be, all roses and balloons and butterflies the whole time. But you had mentioned the word um, intimate and authentic, I think, and unconditional love. And it really, to me, brought me to a whole new level. I didn't know existed for all three of those words.
Mhm.
And that was really beautiful. And then I wanted that in all of my relationships. And it's not an easy level to get to, but they kind of teach us how to do that, I think.
Exactly. Well, and the other thing that's interesting about those commercials about the medications, they talk about the aggression and the acting out. And one of the things that happens for people with Alzheimer's is they lose the ability to sort of regulate their emotions. And so there is all that authenticity. If they're
Mhm.
angry, they're angry.
Yep.
They can't like control that like we can,
Hmm.
or like we should or try to.
Yep.
And so they're just very authentic and something has happened. It's valid and we need to acknowledge that, not
Hmm.
necessarily take it away. There's an article by Tom
Kitwood.
Kitwood, I think, yeah, that article about the 10 signs of well-being for people with dementia. And the very
Hmm.
first one is like dissent.
Hmm.
They still have their self identity, and it often shows up in the form of dissent. And
Hmm.
so knowing that, I was able to celebrate those moments when my
Hmm.
mom was disagreeing with me or when she was, showing a sign of being upset. Um,
Hmm.
so let me just tell you this story. We were walking at the nursing home one day, and it was shortly after I had gotten there. So I was chatting with the head nurse,
Hmm.
and uh, I asked her how long she'd been there. I was curious. And oh, she'd been there like 30 years. And she said, people say to me, how can you tolerate working with people with, old people like that? Isn't it depressing? And my mom was standing there. Now she had lost her ability to speak by this time, but she heard this and she got this really angry look on her face and she pounded her fist on the desk.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. And, the nurse instantly said, "Oh, Jeannie, you know, it's not depressing. I love being here. I love taking care of you." And she later said to me, "I'm going to be much more careful about what I say now." But, um, my mom was reacting. She was reacting in a valid way. And that's the piece we need to learn that people with dementia, their emotions are valid. Their
Well,
emotions are the way they're communicating to us.
exactly, exactly. And people are taught that they can't process, and they can take it in. They just can't state it the way they used to in terms of using words to communicate and things. I kind of refer to it like we know that a person who's in a coma, we've been told this over and over and over, can hear, can see, can feel everything that's going on around them, but they can't communicate that. And yet we don't give that same respect to somebody with dementia.
Mhm.
And which is really sad because they're standing right in front of them. And you see and can hear that so often with not only professionals, but with family members as well, because it's been ingrained with us that they're not parts anymore. And that's how they were treated. That's what got me into this space, was my frustration of why isn't anyone talking to the person with dementia or the families. It was just kind of the medical model and the researchers telling us what it's like, but they had never walked in those shoes. And to me, there was such a blatant difference of what they thought versus what reality was. And that's what I love about talking with people like you on this show, is you've lived it, you've seen it, you've experienced it, and now you're resharing what you've learned, what you've experienced, and how it's enhanced your life. Because so often people think, what do you mean it enhanced your life? What do you mean it was a gift? I mean, hello, because they're still reading, and there's a lot more positive stuff out there. We have made progress, but it still is not the mainstream thought that comes to people's minds when they hear Alzheimer's or dementia or Lewy body. It's a it's a big cliff that they're jumping off of with that. So,
Lori, I have a whole chapter in the book called The Gifts of Alzheimer's. And I also included a section at the end in the resources for caregivers,
mhm,
um, like little stories. And one of these stories is about you, about people who have been caregivers. They've
mhm,
gone through the journey with a loved one, and they have chosen, like you and I have, to
mhm,
make meaning of that experience
yep,
by doing something. And
mhm,
it's this contribution that we've made that has the ability to relieve the suffering that
yep,
we've been through. And one of my neighbors started a a run for Alzheimer's. He's a long distance runner. So in honor of his grandmother, he started this race for Alzheimer's, and he's been doing it for 13 years. Has raised like $100,000 for the Alzheimer's Association. Look at what you're doing with your workshops and your book and um, your podcasts. I mean, this is amazing. Other people are doing workshops and trainings. One woman became an Alzheimer's coach. So there's just all kinds of opportunities for people to take their experience that did involve suffering as well as joy and make
mhm,
meaning out of it.
yep,
And I do want to say, one of the most important things for me, I didn't really realize it until my mom's funeral, when the priest, who happened to be our cousin, was giving the sermon, and he said how when when I was around and when mom was like meeting with him or others, shed this big smile on her face.
Mhm.
And he said, when she was smiling like that, we knew that she was engaged in her world around her and that she wasn't suffering. And Lori, that was one of the most important things I realized. I mean, this to me is one of the most important things any human being can do is to relieve another person's suffering.
Yep.
And that's what a loving caregiver who understands the disease, who makes an effort to, say yes to what their loved one is offering, and to just love them where they are, who they are, how they are now. It's you take away their suffering.
Well, and what's beautiful too about that is getting people to really tap into the multisensory communication, because he saw, he didn't hear, but he saw the difference. And he felt the peacefulness. And, I mean, there's just so many levels of communication that I think we ignore so often, but we all want to fit in. We all want to belong. So the beauty of this is, and I didn't realize this when I wrote my book, Betty the Bald Chicken. I thought it was really just about Alzheimer's and dementia, because in
Right.
my dream, that was the focus of the whole story. And it took me 10 years to get it written, and got that out. And I'm so glad I waited, because I finally figured out, just like I'm sure you have too, that what you learn through this disease applies to all of life. And,
Exactly.
that inclusion is for, people who have chronic illnesses. It's for kids that are just, learning about the world. It's about addictions. It's about, it can cover any situation when you just feel awkward and you don't feel like you belong. And that's, I try really hard to apply. Not that I'm still not judgmental, but I'm not as judgmental by any stretch as I used to be, about things. And I still have a long ways to go. It's kind of like patience. I'll always need more of that, in my life. I always want things to go faster. But to me, that's one of those gifts of, boy, I can really apply this in so many other ways. So let's really dive into the book. Now, you published it originally in 2014, and it's called Where Two Worlds Touch: The Spirit and Science of Alzheimer's Caregiving. And then you revised it, and now it's the 10th anniversary. I can't even imagine. I just spit mine out finally the other year. I can't imagine 10 years later and then rewriting it. So what encouraged you to do a new edition, of your original book?
Well, that's a great question, Lori, because during the pandemic, all of us who were doing workshops and trainings, everything kind of quieted down,
Mhm.
and anything that we did had to be done on Zoom.
Yep.
And I was invited in April. I remember the date, April 2022. I was invited to give a presentation to a church in New York City.
Mhm.
And it was a lovely, spring afternoon, and about 35, 40 people showed up for this Zoom presentation on Alzheimer's caregiving, which is a significant number of people.
Mhm.
And, I gave like a 20-minute presentation, and then for the rest of the hour and 15 minutes, answered questions. And when I finished that experience, I thought, I think I really helped people.
Mhm.
I think this really made a difference. And so I thought I'd like to do more of this. And so I contacted the publisher who had published the original book to see if we might be able to do some marketing
Mhm.
around the book, because I mean, it was still selling and still in print and still valid information. And she said, well, what would you think about doing a 10th anniversary edition,
Mhm.
a new edition? And I said, oh, sure, that'd be great. I thought it would be really easy to do. I thought I would have that done in 6 months, but I didn't. It took 2 years. But that's why I did it, is because I realized in that experience also that 10 years had passed, and all the people that I had been presenting to 10 years ago are probably not caregivers anymore. It's like the
Mhm.
caregiver world, Lori, as you know, it's like a revolving door. I mean, look at how long you've been doing your podcast, and you
Yep.
have people coming in every single day, and every single one of them needs the information that we have to offer. And so that's why I like the idea of a new book, because new books get more attention than old
Mhm.
books. And why I did it is because the thousands of new caregivers who have entered that revolving door in the last 10 years. Let's reach out to them.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, I think back, when I stepped in, which is about the same time as you, to this industry, there were very few books. Like you said, speaking Alzheimer's was like the Bible
It
out
was
there. It was really kind of a lone soldier out there. And now there's thousands of books written by caregivers, care partners, by professionals in the industry, and even by people living with dementia. And so it's, which is wonderful to see. But like you said, it never gets old. And I think people are starting to understand that there is no magic bullet, and one book or one philosophy isn't going to hold you. You really need to hear the different voices, because different things work at different times. And I think for a while it was just, well, I got trained by this, or I got trained by that. I don't need any more. And I think the door's opening, that's wonderful, but don't ever stop learning. and
right.
and don't ever think that you don't know enough. And I see that all the time, like in memory cafes, people come in and go, I can't really say anything. I'm new and I don't really know. And it's like, you always know more than, so and so, because you've experienced longer. But yeah, you're going to know less than so and so because they've been in the game and on the journey much longer. But it still doesn't mean you can't share and that you can't support one another. And that's so magical when people hook up and share their information. And even if you're listening and you've not been touched by dementia, chances are you will be. If not in your own family, your circle of friends, your neighbor, it doesn't make any difference. And these skill sets that you learn through dementia, again, you can apply with a 2-year-old or a 102-year-old, no matter what their condition is in life. It's really about kindness and awareness and authenticity and inclusion, and making everybody feel comfortable. And don't we all want that?
Exactly.
We don't just want that because we have dementia. We want that, from the day we pop out of the womb, I think. But we don't really talk about that stuff. That's kind of mental health stuff. You don't talk about that. You don't talk about feeling uncomfortable. And we need to let people know what makes us feel good and what makes us feel uncomfortable. And we can do that still in a dignified fashion without getting in a fight or doing any of those things. It's just about appreciating everybody's different, and they're not all clones of me, or you. That's just not the way the world is. And it's much easier to live in this world, I think, when you are inclusive. And I learned so much from people by trying to be inclusive, stuff that I never would have known before, that changed my view because I never looked at it from that angle, or I never experienced it at that angle. And I think that makes me a little better person. Not that I'm better than anybody by any stretch, because again, I don't think any of us are true experts. I think we just have different experience levels, and we're always learning, as we go. But I don't think any of us will ever truly be the expert in this, because it's just changing and we're learning so much.
Something you said, Lori, I just want to quickly follow up on is because this experience, and you want to talk about gifts from Alzheimer's,
Mhm.
this experience for me of walking with my mother on this journey, I feel very strongly brought out the best in me.
Mhm.
I say this often to people that I'm very organized.
Mhm.
I'm a very organized person, and we created the Healing Moments Alzheimer's Ministry. We created a CD
Mhm.
for caregivers, and I took it over to the studio of the woman who had done the music so that we could listen to the advanced copy. And as I was leaving, she said something to me. She said, "You know, Jade, you're a very interesting combination of qualities." She said, "You're very organized, but you're also very sweet."
Mhm.
And I paused and I said, "You know, I used to just be organized. Caring for my mother made me sweet."
Mm.
And I, I, I stay by that. It's like that experience of caring for her and engaging every day with multiple people in this nursing home with dementia just made me a different person. It
Mhm.
made me a compassionate person. That's what I want to do. I want to be a compassionate person in the world. I'm still organized, but
Mhm.
it's like that's who I want to be. And that experience of caring for my mother brought out that part of me. And
Yeah.
I like that part of me.
Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that. I'm now caring for my ex-husband and his wife, my daughter and I. And so, you got to go in and get all the forms changed and, who are you? And everyone is shocked. An
Yeah.
ex-wife? They're
Yeah.
like, you are so, and because it's just, again, we've been taught that divorce is mean and nasty, and you would never even think of doing that. And it's like, no, this is just another human being that needs
Yeah.
help, and I want to be able to help both of them. And, but it's so sad that our society thinks that that's really a foreign thing, that there's limits on who you can be kind to.
Right. But that's who you are, Lori.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
who you are. That's who you've become. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just everything doesn't things can be done, difficult things can be done in kind manners.
Yeah.
And I think that through dementia, again, I just think it applies to all the world, and it's just such a beautiful example. Let's talk about the book, go back again into that. When you go to rewrite it, do you like rip it all apart? Is there anything left from the original version of the book? How do you handle that?
Well, there's a lot left from the original version of the book. And the most important piece that's left, of course, is my story,
Mhm.
which actually is a love story with my mom. Um, and we did have a difficult relationship. And it's amazing how mother getting Alzheimer's and me developing my compassion changed our whole relationship, changed our whole dynamic.
Mhm.
So that story, that evolution stays included. I've also included the original stories of other caregivers that I met along the way. Those
Mhm.
have remained. And it's important. There are lots of facts in the book about dementia and about caregiving. Those facts are still in there too. But story, I think, is so important because story is how people learn. Stories is how people learn with their hearts. And that's, I think, what you remember. You remember from the stories versus, listing off a lot of facts. So the stories are still there. Um, the innovative techniques, my discoveries are still there. The innovative techniques I discovered, I talked about using improvisation techniques. Those are there. Um, I discovered them and I used them with great success. So that information is all still available for caregivers. Um, and most important, I think this is the heartbeat of the book, and it was the original book too, is that although there's a lot that's lost, people with Alzheimer's lose a
Mhm.
lot, there's still a lot that remains. And I just worry so much that that gets lost. That part gets lost in all the fears and the worries about, oh my gosh, they're losing their memories, they're losing this or losing that. But the possibility for meaningful relationships, loving relationships with people with Alzheimer's exists. It remains until their last breath. And so
Yeah.
we have to keep that in our consciousness. And then, of course, the other thing that remains is the spiritual focus of the book,
Mhm.
which is about transforming suffering into opportunities for learning and growth. That's in the forefront of all of my writing,
Mhm.
and it's the foundation of this book. And
Mhm.
that's why I said I did add that section, the resources for caregivers, how these are the ways people have transformed their suffering. But
Mhm.
um, you know, we're all going to end somehow, and Alzheimer's is one path. And
Mhm.
I think that this book is an invitation to look at this path with perhaps a little less fear, both on the part of the person who has it and the people who are caring for them, for their family members. It doesn't have to be that terrorizing journey that culturally people think it is. So this is
Yeah.
it's a book of hope and enlightenment, along with all kinds of ideas about how to do caregiving.
And I like that focus on hope. In fact, I've always said on the radio show, be a giver of hope. And we now have a graphic that goes along with that. So people, if they're individuals or a company, can use those and just say, we are a giver of hope. And really, it's about sharing resources, it's about sharing stories. It's just very simple. It's not complicated, but I think, you know, when you're devastated, or when I'm devastated and I'm feeling lost, there's nothing more that I want than hope. And through the example of storytelling, which I agree with you is so powerful, I think we have to get people out of their heads and into their hearts, because I think that's the only way things truly, truly change is to feel the need. We can look at all the logic in the world, but it doesn't push us forward for most of us to the extent that the change needs to occur, because logic doesn't have feeling, and feeling
Right.
is the core of our relationships.
Right.
And so, but I think that was lost by so many for so many years. I mean, you go back to folklore, and they got the power of story. But I think so much of the other ways that we educate people, that was lost, and everything was kind of clinical, and everything's got to have a study. And it's like, life experience is extremely valuable. And everyone's experience is different. And so how do you wrap that into a study can be complicated, but don't lessen the value of those stories because it isn't scientifically proven that this is what someone experienced. And for so many, like you said too, story is easy, it's comfortable, it doesn't overstress the brain, where sometimes when you get all that logic and the studies and the numbers, people are like, okay, now what did it say this and did it say that? And they're measuring how are they supposed to do something instead of feeling how they're supposed to carry on and give comfort, not only to who they're caring for, but for themselves.
Laura, could I say a little something about a study?
Sure, sure.
Because I talk about this study a lot in my book,
Mhm,
and it's research that's been done by the University of Iowa.
mhm,
I'm right down the street from them, and so I got pretty involved in their research. And back in 2010, they did a pilot study, with people with memory loss,
mhm,
similar to people with Alzheimer's. And that pilot study showed that people with cognitive memory loss, they retain emotional memory.
mhm,
And that's something that I think is so important. This study got replicated with people with Alzheimer's, and
mhm,
indeed they had the same results, that once people have forgotten a cognitive experience, the emotion that they experienced remains for a long period of time.
mhm,
So I think in the world that we live in, cognitive memory is just glorified. But there
mhm,
are other kinds of memory that people with Alzheimer's do not lose. They do not lose body memory.
mhm,
Very important if you want to dance with somebody who has Alzheimer's, or they want to ride a bicycle, or play a game, play cards, they remember those kinds of things. And they remember emotions. They have what we call heart memories. And that's where the relationships are built. That's where the relationships are built.
Well, and I love that that study focused on that. I think, again, sometimes they get so task oriented.
Right.
There's a program, I don't know if you've heard of it, called Speckle. And Penny Gardner started it and she's over in England. But Cindy Lazinski, who she runs the dementia friendly, it's called Dementia Together, and they're a dementia friendly community in Colorado, is the only certified person to teach that program. And it's all about emotional memory. And they use it kind of through a picture book, where the picture book is all filled with pictures of the activity that, triggered the emotion. And then as you get to the end of the book, there's only a couple of pictures on the page and the rest are all blank, but in its place are still those emotions, and they will pop up and they will attach to situations that people are involved in that remind them of that incident that they experienced, even though they can't state that. And it's a very effective mode of learning, and something that, again, has taken forever for people to really understand, because again, sometimes the studies aren't always talked about. So I'm glad that study is in your book.
Yeah.
Because by no means am I saying studies aren't good. I think sometimes they just don't focus on reality things that people can change and really feel a sense of that they can apply, where what you're talking about is pretty easy to apply once they read it.
Well, and what makes this study important in the way that I talk about it too in the book is that caregivers have known this all along.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't need a study to tell
Mm-hmm.
me that my mom's emotions were still there when she's pounding
Mm-hmm.
her hand on the desk, offended by what the nurse said about depressing being in nursing homes.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul Rea from the Alzheimer's Association in Boston has been writing for decades that emotions are what people with dementia are good at.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a poem called Heart Memories that was written in 1989 about people with dementia having heart memories. I may not remember that you've come, but I remember how much I love you. I remember how much I care about you. And so um, this study, and I love it, is because the study has validated what
Mm-hmm.
caregivers knew. And
Yep.
that's actually how this study started, or how it happened, is that the director of the graduate students at the University of Iowa was at a medical conference, and a friend of his told him a story about how he, visited his mother, every week. He would go
Mm-hmm.
on Thursdays every week to visit her, but then they would report that she didn't remember that he'd even been there. And one week he was too busy, so he didn't go. And the nurses called him and said, your mother's really out of sorts. We don't know why. She's just really irritated. And he thought, did she miss me? And so he's telling this story to this director from Dr. Dan Trinnell from the University of Iowa, who started to wonder. And that's how this emotional memory research got started. And it's a game changer in the dementia care world, a total game changer. And that's when we go back to story. One
Mm-hmm.
story told to just the right person changed the world,
Yep.
how we look at people with dementia. And I love that we've got scientific research. We've got studies now that show that.
Yep. Well, and there's so many more studies about social interaction and, like social prescriptions for people to go to a group versus just
Exactly.
getting a pill. And again, we haven't changed where that's covered yet, but it's a lot cheaper than a medication in most cases. And it has a long lasting effect, not just on the person with dementia, but the person caring for them and those around them. And so I pray that that expands as well,
Me
because
too.
boy, That's going to be just such a shift changer for sure. Now you've talked about, you have stories of caregivers in their journey as well as your story. Is there any of them that you want to share with our audience, or should we just keep going? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit prior.
Well, I just want to say in the new edition, I
Mhm.
added some stories as well. And they were specifically stories of caregivers from different races,
Mhm.
different cultures, and different sexual orientation. And I thought it was really important to include these to show how a different culture or different race could be impacted on this Alzheimer's journey. And it was it was really touching to see some of the differences. And I will just share one story. There was a woman who, um, African American, and she was living in a very large retirement community. And she did her laundry one day, and her laundry was gone. And she felt like she had been targeted,
Mhm.
that someone stole her laundry because she was Black.
Mhm.
And her daughter, who happened to be an investigator, started an investigation. And it turned out that her mom's laundry wasn't lost at all. She had picked it up and she had gotten it and she had folded it and it was all in her closet. And the daughter was able to discover that. But what's really interesting about that story is something that Naomi Feil talked about all those years ago about validation therapy for older people, how sometimes the wounds that we carry will come to the surface. And this was a story, I mean, it was a typical dementia story that, oh my gosh, she really forgot that she had picked up her laundry. That's the typical dementia story. But that validation story is the wound that came up. She thought she was targeted because she was Black.
Yep.
You have to just think of the woundedness that she has carried all these years. And this will happen with people with dementia. They'll share stories like that or wounds like that from their past. And it's an opportunity, another opportunity for us to be kind and
Mhm.
to validate that. So that was a very touching story that I was able to share.
Oh, that's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, if someone is just listening right now, maybe you had to put it on mute while you were working. Sometimes that happens. We have been talking with Reverend Jade Angelica. And, our topic today is really that all is not lost. And there is inspiration and beauty and authenticity and unconditional love that you can experience if you choose to. And by reading her book, Where Two Worlds Touch, can really help you through that process in terms of having a comfortable landing pad because it mixes, Jade's stories, other stories, and applications that you can use along with, the study she just referenced as well. So you can check out her website, which is jadeangelica.com. You can also email her at jadeangelica@gmail.com. And do you want to give out a phone number?
Oh, sure. It's area code 563-582-4724.
Okay, great. I'm going to take just a moment and talk to you about Q for Good, which is a wonderful webmaster that I have. I just can't say enough good things about them. And I know in this world of electronics and websites and blogs and all of those things, it can be a struggle sometimes managing all of the upgrades and things. So check out Q for Good. And if you mention my name, or Alzheimer's Speaks, you can get 10% off as well. So nothing wrong with that. But they are just absolutely fantastic. And I've had websites for many, many years, way before I was involved with the dementia world. I have never, ever worked with a webmaster that is so thorough, so kind, so understanding, and speaks my language, instead of over my head with what the needs are. So with that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the subtitle, which kind of includes the science and in spirituality. We kind of touched on that earlier, but was there anything more that you wanted to expound on?
Yes, I mean the spirituality is the, like I said, it's the foundation of all of my writing.
Mhm.
Um, and it's useful information even for people who aren't caring for someone with Alzheimer's, like the the value and the importance of spirituality in our lives for dealing with all of our life challenges. But the science piece is specific to Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
And as you know, Lori, we don't have a lot of medical cures that are available for Alzheimer's at this time. So the focus of my
We
book,
don't really have any cures,
well,
in my opinion. We have something that might slow it down and might work, but to me, there is no cure at
I
all.
I agree.
I will
I,
be bold at stating
you be
that.
bold. Yes, you be bold. Um, so I focus on healing,
Mhm.
um, but which is a spiritual term, of course, because even when we can't cure a disease, healing is still possible, healing of mind and soul. Um, but the science is also starting to focus on healing. Um, and I talk a lot about the the research that's been done with the various medications over the
Mhm.
years. Talk also, I believe there are now two drugs that may or may not make a difference, but they're approved by the FDA. Um, but then I talk a lot about the research that's being done, as we talked about before, as we alluded to before, the lifestyle changes.
Mhm.
And there was, but it's interesting because that's both the good news and the bad news. It's like there's no magic bullet. They're talking about like magic buckshot, like it's not any one thing. It's all different kinds of things because there's not any one thing that's probably causing dementia. And so we can't just look at it as oh, we're looking for that magic pill, as you said, that's going to just fix it for everybody. But knowing that lifestyle changes can help, it's good news and it's bad news because it tells us that we can do something to protect ourselves to prevent Alzheimer's. But that's the bad news too, is that we have to do something. We have to make lifestyle changes. We have to change our sleeping patterns and we have to change the way we um, allow stress to invade our lives. We have to change our diets. We have to have fewer chemicals in our bodies aren't made to withstand all the chemicals in our environment and it's affecting our brains. And so, like I said, the good news, the bad news, but it's out there now. One of my favorite things I discovered, though, about science is a 12-minute meditation. It's to a chant, the four words, Satanama. This,
Oh, with the Alzheimer's prevention and research.
have you seen it?
Oh yeah, I've known them for years. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it fabulous? It's a
Yes.
12 minute, it's a 12-minute meditation
Mhm.
where you chant and listen to these sounds and move your fingers like this.
Mhm.
It's been shown to improve cognitive memory.
Mhm.
And I found out about this and I've been doing it every day ever since. It's like, hey, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but I'm going to give it a chance. And so I talk about the things that we can do that science has shown we can do to improve our lives. Some people will say meditation, some people will say exercise, some people will say combine those two. They're really good for your brain. So I really, really want to encourage people to read that whole section and to start now before we're showing memory loss. Start now and make these changes in our lives. So that I find really encouraging.
Yeah, well, and I think getting rid of stress, I mean, stress causes a lot of disease. We all know that.
For
And
sure.
so meditation, yoga, just taking quiet time, going for a walk, just where you're not feeling pressured to have to do something or have a deadline or whatever, but just finding that peacefulness to sit and read or just, sit outside and feel the sun on your face, whatever it is. Those things are really, really important, I think. And they're fun to do. I when I was in real estate, it was high level stress, and I would shut my door and I'd shut my blinds and I'd light a candle and I put on meditation thing, and I put a sign on my door, don't disturb, and I turn off my phones, and for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I would just be still. And people thought I was crazy, but it just changed my whole mood. It
Sure.
changed my ability to be more focused, more comfortable. It was amazing, and I have to be honest, I've gotten away from that. And that's something that I need to kind of build back into my day, because it really is, it's simple and it's life changing and it's self-care.
It's self-care. Absolutely. But what's interesting is now that you said take that quiet moment, it's like I used to do that with my mom all the time because she couldn't talk. And so you mentioned having those other ways of connecting.
Mhm.
And sometimes like after lunch, I would go with her to her room and she's like sitting in her wheelchair and we listened to this relaxing music and I would just massage her shoulders while we looked out the window at this beautiful wooded area that was across the street from the nursing home. And it was so peaceful just
Yep.
to be with her in that way. And I think people they get disturbed about how to interact with somebody with Alzheimer's when they can't talk anymore.
What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed
What
to
am I
do?
supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? And it's like, sometimes I would read to her, or I would have I was in school at the time and I have my school books and I would just sit with her and listen to music and hold her hand while I read, you know, and she was sensing my presence and I was sensing her presence. But it was this quiet, peaceful experience. And I think that people miss that. They miss
Yep.
that opportunity when they've got a loved one with Alzheimer's to just be present together.
Yeah.
Very peaceful.
Well, and I just, I would ask our audience to think of who's a person in your life who gives you comfort to just sit on the couch next to and
Mm,
not say a word.
right.
And really think about how that makes you feel. You can still have that with a person with dementia. You can have that with really anybody you choose to, if you just slow down and connect, because it's about, and I know some people think this is too woo woo for them, but it's about our energy and our connection. And we all know of someone who's walked into a room and changed the mood of yourself or others in the room without saying a word. The
Mm,
energy just changes. And we have to really look at that in a solid fashion. And I
exactly.
apply that too with a person with dementia, because sometimes it can be a thing, it could be noise, or it could be light, or it could be temperature, or it could be a person that, and they might not even know that person, but it might trigger, like we talked about earlier, that old emotion. It might remind them of somebody and, trigger a bad emotion, or it could be a really good emotion too. So we have to pay more attention to those things. In your section for resources for caregivers, which is wonderful, I don't think we have enough sections and resources for that. Can you give people just a little introduction to what they would find there?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, let me just take a look because um, one of the very first things I included in the resources for caregivers is a list of questions. I call them reflection questions,
Mhm.
and I put them in there for a reason. One of the things that I did when I first came here to take care of my mom, I was in a doctoral program
Mhm.
at a school in Boston called Faith, Health, and Spirituality. And
Mhm.
so all of my papers involved something to do with spirituality and faith. And then I integrated what I was learning about Alzheimer's into those papers. And for one of the papers, I interviewed four different caregivers. And to prepare for the interviews, I gave them a list of questions. And then I wrote up, stories. I wrote up their stories, and their stories are in the book. And one of the women, my friend Mary Ann, she read that section, her story, to her husband, and he said, "Oh, I had no idea that you were so like insightful about this." And he said, "Were those your words or were those Jade's words?"
Mhm.
And no, they were her words. But she said, "I never really thought about any of those things until Jade asked me these questions."
Mhm.
And so I put the questions in the book because, they're questions like, what are some moments in your role as a caregiver that have brought you joy?
Mhm.
We don't often pause to think about that. What has been your most valuable lesson? What have you learned about life and love? To just pause and think about questions like that. So there are a couple pages of reflection questions for people to think about. And then you'll like this section, Lori, the spiritual practices. And these are
Mhm.
things like prayer, meditation, um, self-care. Those are the things you were talking about. But there's also something I talk about called acceptance.
Mhm.
Acceptance. And a lot of us know the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. We're back to studies now. Studies have shown that acceptance is one of the most effective coping techniques for relieving caregiver stress.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Accept what's going on. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's why learning about Alzheimer's, learning about the diseases of dementia is really important because you need to accept what is.
Yep.
So the spiritual practices in there. And then there's this whole section about a dozen caregivers, how they're making a difference. Like, for example, Linda Everman, I think you know her as
Mhm.
well. She was inspired to, and this took years of
Mhm.
dedicated um, persistence to get the approval of an Alzheimer's stamp, a semi-postal Alzheimer's stamp, that when we buy the stamp, the money goes to Alzheimer's research.
Mhm.
So uh, Kathy Good in Cedar Rapids started a caregiver center that is probably the best in the nation, the most important caregiver center in the nation. Um, these are just ideas of things that people can do, big things, small things. And then, of course, in the resources section, there's also a list of books or films. Um, but Lori LeBay's story is in there too, of the caregivers making a difference.
Oh,
So I
thank
was
you.
really, really pleased to be able to include that. Lisa Genova's story, a neuroscientist who wrote a novel, Still Alice,
Mhm.
how important that book was to me, and how it's opened up the hearts. That's what we're trying to do, open up the hearts of the world for people
Mhm.
with dementia.
Yeah, and showing real life examples of how to still live well together,
Yeah.
and that's a beautiful thing. Well, Jade, as always, this has just been a lovely, lovely conversation, and I can't thank you enough for being with us. Again, people can go to her website, which is jadeangelica.com. They can also email Jade at jadeangelica@gmail.com. And her phone number is 563-582-4724. And, if you get the book, it would be great to, do they order that through your website, through Amazon? What do you prefer?
You can get it through Amazon. You can get it through all the, all the online places.
Okay.
Or your local bookstores can get it in for you too.
Okay, great. And don't forget to like and share and maybe write a little quote for her, as an endorsement after you've had a chance to look at it as well. That always helps the authors out greatly. So again, thank you so much for being with us. To our audience, again, I would invite you to be a giver of hope And you can go to Alzheimer Speaks, go to our free educational resources. You can download a logo there and you can add it to your social media. You can put it in your emails. You can put it on your website. And all it is asking people to share information, share resources, share their stories, make the next guy a little bit more comfortable with an uncomfortable situation and spread the hope. So thank you, everyone. Can't wait till we have you back on again, because you're always moving and shaking something out there, Jade. So thank you for all the work and your persistence. A lot of people walk away after this journey, and you really brought it to the next level of teaching and helping others, and really, like you said, caring for others because of what you've learned, and you've impacted so many people in the years you've been at this. So thank you for that.
Well, and thank you so much, Lori, for having me. And it is always a joy to be with you, and a honor and a pleasure to be on this journey with you. Like you
Thank
said,
you.
we've been on the journey for about the same amount of time. So
Yeah, it's so fun being able to meet people, and that's been such a gift too, is, not only the learnings, but the connections that are
absolutely.
made. In fact, one connection I should mention, I don't know if you're familiar with the product Twiddle, but this can really help people with dementia who have some anxiety. They're like little fidget muffs, and they
Oh,
can
so
warm their hands, and they're absolutely fantastic. And they have given us a discount code people can get with AS 25, so you can get 25% off their muffs. But they can really help during sundowning and things like that, or just
sweet.
when people are nervous. And it's just another tool. And you can just go to their website, which is the number 4 and then twiddle.com. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks, Jade. Bye-bye.
Bye.